as we watch this clip that we're about to watch of RFK Jr. on Piers Morgan's show, I need you to keep in mind how RFK brands himself with his independent presidential run. The thing he has leaned into the most, well, there's two. One of them is like, you know, he's big on the anti-COVID restrictions, which, by the way, it's like nobody's even talking about those things anymore. It's just like you're a few years late in terms of this being like a relevant thing, running on like, I hate Dr. Fauci. There's a large percentage of the American population these days that's like, wait, who is that again? So that's one thing that he's big on. The other thing he's big on is saying, I'm the anti-war candidate. I'm the only true anti-war candidate. This is his thing. Well, it's hilarious to label yourself as that when you have the position that he has on Israel. So here he is on Piers Morgan's show. And look, he's basically going to argue against a diplomatic negotiated settlement and a ceasefire. In other words, he's taking the wanton, brazen, neocon, pro-war position. Let's watch and then we'll break it down.
At what point does this desperation to eliminate the last members of Hamas get overtaken by the sheer volume of civilians being killed in the process, which I cannot believe will do anything longer term than foment the ideology that drove Hamas in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking a lot of questions, and I'd like you to give me time to answer them.
Sure.
You know, and you could ask the same. You brought up Nazi Germany as a kind of an analogy for what's happening in the Mideast, and in 1945 or 44 at Casablanca, Churchill and Roosevelt had an argument because Roosevelt said we have to denazify Germany, and if we don't denazify Germany, it is going to, the Nazis are going to rise up and do the same thing again. Churchill did not want an unconditional surrender for the Nazis. He said, we'll have to kill too many civilians to do that, and everybody will fight for the death. But Roosevelt won that argument. We killed about 2 million Germans during World War II in order to get into Berlin and denazify it. Today, Germany is the richest country in Europe. It's one of the most powerful economies in the world. I think it's the fourth most powerful. And nobody's scared of Germany because it's a peaceful country. And today, Hamas, which is authoritarian control of, hasn't won an election in 16 years, of Gaza, is a corporate kleptocracy, and it's absolutely intent on one issue only, to just annihilate Israel and to kill all the Jews. And in their charter, Hamas has a provision that says it is against Islamic law to even negotiate with Israel except as a ruse. So I don't see how people who are saying, well, you should have a ceasefire, then what? Then what? You've rewarded Hamas for taking hostages, and they're going to keep taking hostages to get more and more advantage. And this is, by the way, the fifth ceasefire. On October 7th, they broke a ceasefire.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So are you going to go back to that status quo?
Well, I don't think there's any future. I don't think you can have any future.
I
don't think you can have any future there with Hamas retaining any form of power whatsoever. Nor do I think Netanyahu.
I agree.
Oh my God, shit! Where do I begin with this one? So basically, he's making the comparison to the Nazis, and in his mind, Hamas are like the Nazis. And he said, look, they denazified Germany. They need to de-Hamasify Gaza. That's basically the idea. He knows that is not possible. Why? Because Hamas is just a Palestinian hardline militant group. That's what they are. You think you're going to find a way to eliminate and eradicate Palestinian hardline militancy? That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. By the way, it was the PLO before Hamas, and now it's Hamas. And after Hamas, it could be Hamas 2.0 or PLO 2.0 or some other group with some other name. They are creating probably triple or quadruple the number of Hamas members every day. Why? Because they're carpet bombing innocent women and children and babies and civilians. You know, men who are just regular guys working regular jobs at the butcher or at the bread store or wherever. When you kill so many innocent civilians, you leave people hopeless and helpless, and they're going to turn to wherever they feel like they can get revenge and retribution and vengeance for their loved ones who were taken from them when their loved ones did nothing wrong. So, and by the way, RFK knows this. Everybody knows this. Netanyahu knows this. Everybody knows this. There is no military solution here. You can't de-Hamasify Gaza when you're making Hamas bigger by the day. That's not possible. So what does that mean? It means that argument is just a pathetic excuse to continue a permanent war, or as we may call it, as we do in other contexts, a forever war. Something that RFK purposefully campaigns against every time he campaigns. I'm the anti-war candidate. I'm against the forever wars, except for this one in particular. I'm in favor of that forever war. Let's call it what it is. You're a neocon. You're a warmonger. You support a forever war here. By the way, it's hilarious to have this conversation where he brings up Hamas and compares them to Nazis. This came out, I think, the same day of a Likud Israeli former MP. He went on Israel's #1 news show, and he cited Hitler favorably. He said, look, Hitler said he can't rest. If there's one Jew left in the world, he can't rest. Well, I say I can't rest if there's one, Palestinian Islamo-Nazi left. So that same ideology of Hitler, like, I got to get rid of all these Jews, is the same ideology this Likud MP would use. I got to get rid of all these Palestinians, man. These Islamo-Nazis. So what this guy does, he overlooks, disregards, doesn't care about the mountain of evidence of genocidal comments and genocidal policies from Israel. And he keeps going back to, the 1988 Hamas Charter, which talked about hating the Jews. What he's not telling you is there's been a bunch of charters since then. And Hamas has tried a multitude of different strategies. There was a time when they said very clearly, look, we're changing our policy. We don't have a problem with Jews. We have a problem with Zionists. And by the way, we'll take a two-state solution along the 1967 borders right now. In other words, we're not saying everything is ours and that's the end of the conversation anymore. We're willing to compromise. We're willing to negotiate. They went through a whole period doing that. Guess what? That got them nowhere too. Just like in 2018, the Great March of Return, remember that? This was Palestinians going all in on the peaceful, nonviolent resistance approach, going all in on the strategy of like the civil rights movement, for example. And what happened? They would march to the fence, and then Israeli snipers gunned a lot of them down. People needed to have legs amputated. Journalists were killed. And so they tried the peaceful way, they didn't work. They tried the violent way, it didn't work. What you're looking at is just the backlash and the outcry of a people who are permanently oppressed and occupied, have no sovereignty, have no freedom, have no human rights, have no justice, have no independence. In Gaza, they're in an open-air prison. Israel controls the borders. Israel controls the water and the food and the fuel and everything that goes in there. They're doing a total siege, treating everybody like they're an evil terrorist, like they're all Hamas. That's what they announced that's what they're doing. That is what they're doing right now as we speak. That, by definition, is a genocidal policy. And he's got nothing to say about the genocidal policy of the state in the region with all the power. Israel has all the power. The IDF has all the power. They're backed by the #1 superpower in the world. They are enacting genocidal policies. They are enacting ethnic cleansing. He's got nothing to say about any of that. Not a single criticism for any of that. It all comes back to, well, Hamas. We need to de-Hamasify Gaza. By the way, he also goes on to say Hamas is a, quote, corporate kleptocracy. There's a lot of shit you could say about Hamas. You could say they're, in Islamist militant group. That's fair. A corporate kleptocracy? What are the wires in his brain getting mixed up and he thought he was talking about, fucking big ag or something and he says this about Hamas? Like, what a fucking weird thing to say. What a weird thing to say. But this is what he does. Look, the controversial point I saved for last, but here it is. I don't know, man. It is hard for me to conclude that Israel doesn't have something on this guy, right? It is hard for me to conclude that they don't have something on him. Remember, there was that famous clip of him, I think it was on Andrew Schultz's podcast, and he's like, look, we had everybody around. We had Harvey Weinstein, we had Bill Cosby, he lists like 7 well-known rapists, right? Or Jeffrey Epstein, and he goes down a whole list. And he had been on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. He goes, oh, yeah, it was actually for like a family event, and I was only on it once, blah, 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 blah. And, by the way, remember, this is a guy who wrote a book about all the people he cheated on his wife with, and then his wife ended up committing suicide. And it was a lot of women that he was sleeping with, RFK. So I look at that and I go, that's what we do know about him. What do we not know about him? And as we all know, there's plenty of evidence to indicate that Jeffrey Epstein was Mossad. So does Israeli intelligence have something on this man that makes him one of the biggest rah-rah Israel people in the world? I can't help but think it about him. I can't help but think it about somebody like Lindsey Graham. Although, to be fair about Lindsey Graham, he ideologically has always been in favor of every war he's ever met. But with RFK, he pretends to be anti-war on so many different things. And then all of a sudden on this one, it's, rah-rah far-right in Israel, rah-rah settler colonialism, rah-rah ethno-state and theocracy, rah-rah endless war. And he just ignores the fact that there's over 16,000 dead children, over 38,000, now it's over 40,000 dead civilians, that more than half of Gaza is completely obliterated and destroyed, that they cut off the food, the fuel, and the water, and people are starving to death. He totally ignores the 92% civilian death rate to cheerlead Israel. This is a guy who's so critical of the United States government and our foreign policy, but our top allies' foreign policy, which is even more brutal, all of a sudden it's, you know, hey, they're poor Israel, right? They're such a victim. They're such a victim. I can't, man. I can't. To the extent you're going to make a Nazi comparison, RFK, you have it exactly backwards. The Nazi comparison right now is certainly more apt for the IDF and for Israel. And by the way, there are 89 different genocidal comments, which we literally have on video, and we have direct quotes of. But he's got nothing to say about any of that. Gee, weird. Weird. It's almost like he's ignoring it on purpose, and it's almost like maybe they have something on him, and he feels like he can't tell the truth on this issue. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.